for the last since Simchas Torah, since the Simchas Torah War. We're going to start off with 2 chapters of Tehillim on the screen. Lam Natzayach Mizmor LeDavid Yanchad Dinavim Sarah Isagav Chashem Melehei Yaakov Yishlach Ezrecha Mikodesh U'Mitzieni Sadeka Yizkor Kol Mechasecha V'Eilas Kayadash Nesela Yitin Lecha Chivavecha V'Chalatzascha Yimalei D'Ran Rabbi Shuasecha V'Shem Eloheinu Nidgal Yimali Adinoi Kol Mishalesecha Ata Yadati Ki Yashia Adonai Mashiachai Yanei Umishmei Kadshe V'Gvuros Yesha Yeminai Ele v'rechev, ele v'asusim, v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu naskir, hema karu v'nafalu, v'anachnu kamnu v'anisaydad, Adonai Yeshia, Melech Yaneinu v'yayim kareinu. And chapter 150, Hallelujah, Hallelujah v'kadshai, Hallelujah b'kiya uzai, Hallelujah b'gvuresav, Hallelujah karev gudlai, Hallelujah b'seika shofar, Hallelujah b'nebel v'chinor, Hallelujah b'soif v'machal, Hallelujah b'minim v'ugav. Hallelujah b'silsil shama, hallelujah b'silsil serua, kol haneshama hallelujah, hallelujah. Everybody has either a dollar bill or a coin. If you don't have, we have for you in your own place to give the tzedakah. And tzedakah tatzim l'mavis, and b'shoveha b'tzedakah says the captives come back in the merit of tzedakah. Only push it down with the. Sure. Thank you, Dovi.
Right.
We're going to continue with the Gemara. I'm just going to put up some other links on the screen, which I didn't have a chance to put up before on the computer. We're going to learn today, so we're going to touch upon halachas of Sirtut. Sirtut means making lines in a Torah. If you've ever seen a Sefer Torah, you'll see there's lines in it. Those lines are halacha l'Moshe Sinai. From Moshe Rabbeinu, we are told to make these lines. We have a tradition how to make them. We learned about that today. The last thing we learned in the Gemara was about Rameir. Rameir, he was so wise and so knowledgeable in Torah inside out that he was able to write the Megillah from memory when he was in a city which did not have a Megillah, the city where he eventually passed away in. And he ended up from there back in Eretz Yisrael somehow. How exactly, we're not sure. Different traditions about it. But he's buried in Tiberia. We're going to discuss several people today who are buried in Tiberia. In the car on the way here, we're discussing about those. If you go to Tiberia per capita in the north, in the Galil, you have more Tanaim, Jewish sages, and Amoraim buried in the north than anywhere else in Eretz Yisrael. So the last thing we said was that Rameir was so bucky, was so knowledgeable in Torah, and he himself was a sofer, was a scribe, that it's like the Torah was in front of his eyes constantly. And therefore, as an exception for him, he was allowed to write the Torah, the Megillah from memory. The Yerushalmi says that he wrote 2 Megillahs, one Megillah from memory, and another Megillah that he copied from the first Megillah, which he wrote. And yeah, so according to the Yerushalmi, the discussion over here is what's with the first Megillah, which Rameir wrote? Would it be kosher to use or not? Once we're on the topic of different people, like on the caliber of Rameir, who were so bucky, so fluent in the entire Torah by heart. You go into Israel, every single year they have what's called the Chidon HaTanach. They have a Tanakh competition. It's always on the Independence Day, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and there's people from all over the world which come to compete and to see who knows Tanakh best. And they ask them such difficult questions. So these are people which would never have any issue in Chidon HaTanach, in the Tanakh competition. Someone like Rameir, but even Ezra Sofer, Ezra the scribe, even him, he also said that he shouldn't write the Torah from memory. So the Gemara will now give another anecdote.
He's the singer of the Meir Baal HaNes?
Yeah, the Meir Baal HaNes. Called the Meir Aneni all comes from Mr. Meir. Right? There was a second Meir who was also a Tana, but seemingly it's where Meir Baal HaNes is not him. And the traditions that a Meir Baal Nes is buried standing up. The Rebbe spoke about that, Ramor Cheliyahu in 1992, in Beis. He's buried standing up. The tradition is with a walking stick in his hand, wearing his Shabbos garments, ready to greet Mashiach. That as soon as Mashiach comes, he doesn't even have to take the time to stand up. He'll be ready to greet Mashiach right away.
Who's this?
Meir Baal Nes.
Oh.
And so the Mordechai, he's the chief rabbi of Israel, it's Friday chief rabbi, he brought this up to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, we already see this in Gemara, Masechta, I think it's Kiddushin actually, I think one of these days, Daf Yomi, how we see people are buried standing up.
Oh.
Because the Gemara describes burial caves, how people are buried. And so it has a cave with the size of 4 amas by 4 amas, about 6 feet by 6 feet. And there's different opinions how many people could be buried in that cave. They wouldn't bury people in the ground. They would make like indentations, holes in the walls, bury them, and then cover up the hole. And that's how people would rest. So there's one opinion, the Gemara says 4 people, and it says 8 and 12. And one opinion says 16 people could be buried in that cave. How do you do it? And you have to, it's like a mathematical equation, but everyone's buried at an angle. So some people are buried in the ceiling, sort of angled up. It means they're standing. So in the Gemara, we have a source how people are buried standing up. It's not just a tradition, it's also a source for it in the Gemara. You go into there's many.
They're in the cave here, not in the grounds.
So when you walk into the cave, you won't see any bodies or any beds or any, urns, any coffins. They're buried in the walls of the cave. That's how people used to get buried.
But they used to then, after they would take the bones and then put them in a
Right. Right. So over different time periods, different traditions. Sometimes they would leave it in the cave and wait for them to decompose, and then they would move the bones into the ground. With different times and different traditions. So we're speaking about now Rav Chananel, not Rav Chananel, which we have on the side of the Gemara, most pages of the Shas. That's Rabbeinu Chananel. He was much later in times of the Balad Tosfos. We're talking about the Rav Chananel. He's buried in Tiberia as well. On the screen, you can see a picture of the place where he's buried. It's on a city street in Tiberia. It's very close, like in the center of Tiberia. Used to be outside the city of Tiberia, and that's why so many people are buried there. But now the city was built around it, and many great Chachamim, sages are buried there. Of course, you have the Rambam, who's buried there, his father next to him. But right next to them is about 10 different Tanoim and Amirayim. You have the Shalah, Dovi's ancestor, but you have Ravina, Rav Ashi, the authors of compilers of Talmud Bavli. You have Rav Kahana, and you have a whole list of other people who are buried all around the Rambam. The Rambam is buried right there. So there's also, among the people buried right near the Rambam is Rav Chananel. And that's a picture of his burial area. If you walk down the street in that area of Tiberia, you'll see, like in the middle of the street, Rav Yirmiyah is buried there. We learned about Rav Yirmiyah not too long ago in Masechta Tainis. You have buried over there the old Jewish cemetery where Rav Nachman Mendel of Harduk, who lived in Tiberia, is buried. The Alter Rebbe went to him originally after the Maggid passed away as a Rebbe. So you have many people buried in Tiberia. And so you have Rav Chananel buried in that area as well. He was a Talmud Muvak. He was one of the most devoted Talmidim students of Rav. Rav, name is Rav Abba. He was a student of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. He was the first generation of Amirayim, and many times he's considered to be a Tana. Some people attribute different sayings to him, saying he lived a very, very long life.
What should Rabbi say?
Rav. He was a student of Rav. He was considered to be the top student of Rav. He also learned for a while by Rabbah. And he learned a lot of Torah for many years. So he's considered to be an expert in Shas. Many halachas that we know from him, and many halachas from Rav, we know in the name of Rav Chananel. As a matter of fact, if you learn today's Daf Yomi, There, Rav Hananel is quoted over there, a very, you could say, not famous or sort of controversial psak of Rav Hananel, which you could say many rabbis, modern day rabbis, have sort of ran with it in ways that I don't think Rav Hananel intended to. It's called Afki'inin Rabbanan Kiddushim Minei, certain situations where the Rabbanan, the sages, the Bezdin is able to annul a Kiddushin, the marriage, in certain situations. And it's based on a story at the end of Masechet Kiddushin. I'm pretty sure it's in today's daf, and if you're learning daf yomi, about there was a girl who was from a young age, when she was a little girl, her father already betrothed her with Kiddushin to somebody. And although it's not valid, rabbinically it's valid. Then afterwards, when she grew up, she was over the age of bas mitzvah, of consent. The man, the husband, married her legally with the nisuin. And as he's about to marry her, some person runs in from far away and gives her a kiddushin, and she accepts it. So the second person, they said the kiddushin is invalid. And the Gemara goes back and forth. And the Gemara's conclusion, right, Rav Hananel paskind, Rav Brennan and Rav Hananel both paskind that the kiddushin is not valid. That the second marriage of this other person who gave her a marriage much later, like when she's about to marry her husband, who she was betrothed to as a child, is not valid. Not because it's not a good kiddushin, not a good marriage, because on the contrary, the second husband never officially married her when she's an adult. And as a child, she was only married midrabanan rabbinically, because you can't marry someone off and then say they're not married. So rabbinically, she's married. But since this second person who came in acted improperly, the sages, Bezdin, they disqualified his act of betrothal, of marriage. And today it's used by many, not many, shouldn't say many, several Bezdins, if they want to get around certain things, but in general, it's not something that's usually used. It's used in, someone like Rabbi Hananel could do it.
I guess she's being abused, as you're saying.
Correct. But the famous Zira was the son of Rav Hananel. So there's many different psakim. We learned about him in Masechta Tainis. He was the one who said that we asked for rain on Shemini Atzeres, 21 days after Rosh Hashanah. We don't wait till the day after. So Rav Hananel was also a prolific sofer, an author. As a Talmud of Rav, the foremost student of Rav, he knew what to write. He had to be a professional writer. So being that he was a sofer, one time, Rav Chisda, Asher Chel Rav Hananel, so if you have an art school Gemara, you're in 18b3. Rav Chisda, one time, you're about 7 lines from the bottom of the page, Yud Ches Amud Beis 18b. Rav Chisda one time walked into a room and he found Rav Hananel was writing down a Sefer Torah, a Torah scroll. To have a kasis sparim shaloi min aksav. Rav Hananel was writing a Sefer Torah down from memory, not copying from another Sefer Torah, from another place, rather doing it from memory. So he was doing not just Torah, but also Nevi'im and Ksuvim by heart. Shaloi min aksav, not from a written text. Amar Leir, Rav Chisda told to him, I want you to know, Rav Hananel, I think very, very highly of you. And he's telling him a praise. You're such a great person that the entire Torah could be written from your memory and you will not make a single mistake. However, you should not write the Torah from memory. This is what the sages have said. You are not allowed to write even one letter of a Sefer Torah from memory. So can you imagine a Sefer writing a Sefer Torah and he sees the word S, he wrote the Aleph and he came back 10 minutes later. You can't just say, oh, I know the word is S, I'm going to write this stuff. He has to look in the Torah first and then write the stuff.
You know, the Torah should be Ksav, the written Torah has to be written.
Min Ksav.
Oh, yeah.
From a written Torah.
The Torah Shabbat, ideally, was never supposed to have been written at all.
Torah Sheba'al Peh, right, and it was ideally never meant to be written, and we don't have to be medayik, we don't have to be exact in letters like it is in the Torah Sheba'al. If you look at the side of the Gemara, your Gemara, you'll see the Maseres Hashas, you'll see the Agoris Abach, you'll see the Agoris Agra, you'll see many different versions and texts of the Gemara. It wasn't never perfected. We don't have any tradition that all the way back to Ravina Rav Ashi, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, exactly how it was written.
And if we ever get our heads on actually the Talmuds stolen by the Vatican, it would be interesting to see if they altered any stuff.
Correct. Even what the Vatican has is from the times of the Rishonim mainly. It's not from the times of the Gemara, not from the times of the Shas.
What I'm saying is we'd have to make sure they didn't alter the text because maybe.
Oh, saying they could have altered the text. Correct. Yeah.
Stick Yoshka there is something.
I mean,
they say, oh, see, it's in there.
No, the Vatican has. I'm saying, I did hear such a thing that recently Rome said they're going to give back any treasures of the Holy Temple that they have to Eretz Yisrael, to Israel. Now, as the way I've always understood is that this happened in about I think the 400s or the 700s, when Rome was completely ransacked by the Goths or the Visigoths.
After they broke it, according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, actually, the Vandals carried off treasures from over to Africa. Correct.
So exactly, meaning not necessarily do they even know what they have, or it's more rumor, I would say, than fact. They have many Sfarim of the Rishonim, books of the Rishonim.
We should have them back.
So about 10 years ago, actually, the Vatican published on their website. They scanned tons and tons of manuscripts, and they published it on their website. And including them was many manuscripts of Rishonim that people had no idea what it was. People had no idea that it was before. And it was a big excitement when it happened.
Any alterations actually, or did they actually stick to being honest?
So that I'm not aware. That you'll do homework, you'll figure it out, and come back tomorrow. But let's continue the Gemara. So Rav Chisda tells Rav Chananel, as great as you are, you still are not allowed to write down from memory. Says the Gemara, Miklal, Rav Chisda told Rav Chananel a praise of him, that the whole entire Torah could have been written from his memory. It follows that the words of Torah were straight in front of Rav Chananel, get absolute memory and recall of all the words of the Torah on the caliber of Rameir. And yet, even he was forbidden to write the Torah from memory. The Rameir Kasav, but we previously brought the story that Rameir was in Asia, and he wrote the Torah, he wrote a Megillah from memory. How could Rameir write it from memory and not be allowed to write from memory and not Rav Chananel? Answers the Gemara, Shas Adchak Shiny. There's a big difference. When Rameir was in a city called Asia, he was outside of Israel, and there was no Megillah around, so he had to write a Megillah. Rav Chananel, he was in Tiberia. There are many Megillahs around. So there was a Megillah around what to copy from. But he thought to himself that he didn't have to go and find another Megillah because he's so fluent in it. So that's what Rav Chisda was telling him, that he has to write, even someone his caliber has to write from another Megillah. But it wasn't a Shas Adchak. It wasn't the time of urgent need. Halachically, you have to write from, when you're writing Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, you have to write from another text, another Megillah. When you're writing Sefer Torah, Tefillin and Mezuzos, that's different, because since everyone is very familiar with the words, it's not as severe if a Sefer wrote the Tefillin and Mezuzos by heart. And preferably, you should write even Tefillin and Mezuzos. Get yourself, a Sefer should get himself into the habit of writing from another text. You shouldn't write it by heart, especially that there's words that are extra and less, words that are more, words that are less. Unfortunately, we've always had stories that come up every couple of years. You hear about it, about you have a Tefillin or Mezuzah that's missing a word. How could that happen? It's possible if the Sefer was writing it from memory. You wanted to hurry up a little, and you wrote it from memory. Right? So you can skip a word without realizing it.
Yeah.
Right? Even with a computer check, a computer only checks that the words that you have are written properly. It doesn't check that every word is there. So you can't rely on the computer check.
Yeah, the other ones, also they checked the film and they came back and they did it and then again a few times. And they get him check the film,
Yeah.
and then he gave to somebody else to check. And there was one of the words in Shema Yisrael, Hashem again, Hashem, the second Hashem was missing.
Wow. Yeah, so it's very important to write tefillin mezuzahs from another, copying from another text.
Actually, the base of it, there's.
Yeah.
I read actually that there was the difference in separate term, they had to see actually which one was having the correct gerta. I think it would be that if
There was a Sefer Torah in the Heichal that Ezra checked.
it's not about, I don't know, actually maybe the system having the Saduki and meaning, actually, the different heretical sects actually were the habit of fooling around with the Torah. And so if they were having a Kohen done or something, basically, maybe they were tampering with the text to make sure that all the different Torah were true.
Correct. I mean, yeah, there's several Torahs. There was a Torah in Tunisia, which the tradition is that Ezra Sofer checked the Torah. I think it's still around, this Torah. There's in 1967, during the 6-Day War, the Tunisian Arabs, they went on a pogrom, a rampage, and they destroyed the entire, they stormed the Jewish quarter, and they burnt down the biggest shul in Tunisia, together with hundreds of Sefer Torah, 100 Sefer Torah, maybe over 100 Sefer Torah. The only Torah that survived was that Torah, which had the tradition Ezra Sofer checked it.
There's the same thing as for example, Aleppo.
The Aleppo Codex, that's a little bit different, no, because that's just right.
A certain parts actually were missing, and then they all came up with a whole big story.
Correct. Interesting, in 1973, the Yom Kippur War, in the 67. So after this whole huge mob went, and they went right outside of the Jewish school, which Shluchim established, with hundreds of Jewish kids inside. And they quickly, the Rabbi Pinson was a shliach in Tunisia, quickly called up to Maskirus, so the Rebbe said, emergency, we need a bracha. The Rebbe said, don't worry. Continue what you're doing, everything will be fine. The mob gathered outside of the building, and then they just dispersed. They all left.
I actually have at home, like in the Aleppo one, but wouldn't necessarily be able to be used to get for practical stuff, just be for a bit from our text. I have it at home, but I like comparing text.
Let's continue with the next Gemara.
I can make it sure.
We're going to talk about the halachas of Sirtut. If you look at in the Arts of Gemara, it's 18b4, second column. Yeah. So here is a picture of a empty page of a Sefer Torah. You see, you have lines, plenty of lines. These lines that are printed, these are lines that are etched with a special type of pen, a special type of tool. It's more like a needle tool, which could scratch the lines into the parchment. It's a mitzvah. We have different sources, different Gemaras. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a tradition going back to Moshe Rabbeinu, back to Har Sinai, when he got the Torah, that you need to have Sirtut. You need to have lines etched in.
A Sirtut or Sirtut?
Sirtut, it's called.
Sirtut.
The height, the distance between the lines should be about double the height of the letter base. Unlike everywhere else, every other language in the world, I think, where you write on top of the line, right? So the bottom of the letter goes on top of the line. Over here in the Sefer Torah, it's exactly the opposite. You start from the top of the line and you go downwards. So it doesn't reach to the bottom of the line, except the big letters reach a little bit above the line, and some of them reach below the line. The Sirtut has to be in the Sefer Torah, these lines. If it's not there, it can make big questions, big shilas on the Sefer Torah. Nowadays, they use a heavier duty parchment, and they use very good tools made out of good metal, and the lines generally stay for many, many, many years, decades, maybe centuries. But some of the older Sefer Torah, which were not made as well, so the lines could fade with time, and it's a big shaila, it's a big question in halacha if it's still kosher, and you should really have to ask a competent rav. See, this is called Sirtut, lines written in the Sefer Torah. Most Seferim don't do it themselves. Most Seferim actually just order it from cloth people which make a cloth. But this is Sirtut, the lines in the Sefer Torah.
How do they make sure that the line is straight? Now they must do it by computers.
Now there's so many ways. There's like lasers, which are etched, a laser in the shape of the whole page is like that. And they even have like a press sort of with like you can make the entire row at once. You understand? Meaning they have like 12, let's say whatever, how many lines? There's usually about 48 lines. So they have 48 different needles going across at once to make all the lines at once. They could do it a lot faster. It has to be done by hand. It can't be done by machine, but it can be done a lot quicker and a lot more accurate than it ever was done before. That's the lachas of Sirtut.
It's a boo. No, it's not a boo on the part. It's 18b3.
There's just find the Wikipedia page on Sirtut. Here it is. That's a Sirtut, and one of these had the tool for which is Sirtut, what to use for Sirtut. All right. Anyways, can't find it right now. I had it earlier. So Sirtut are the lines in a Sefer Torah. Al Pi Kabbalah, of course, there's many major ideas about Sirtut. How the letters come down through how the chayis, the life which comes down through the letters of the Torah, which gives life to the world, needs a Sirtut. So the Gemara we mentioned earlier, how the Megillah needs Sirtut. Megillah also needs a lines etched out like a Sefer Torah, because we have the word in the Megillah called kichsavam, as they are written. If Sirtut, if they did not make the lines in a Megillah, the Megillah isn't valid. How about tefillin and mezuzahs? We just learned previously that tefillin and mezuzahs are different when it comes to writing from memory. A sefer, if he writes a tefillin and mezuzah from memory, it's still kosher. Not ideal, not preferred, but it's still kosher. What about writing a tefillin and mezuzahs without lines? It really goes down to what's the core reason you need Sirtut, you need the lines. Is the reason you need the lines, is Sirtut, is it in order to make sure that the Sefer Torah is beautiful, it's nice? So if that's the case, when it comes to a Sefer of a Torah, a Megillah, a Sefer of Ksuvim, you're reading it in Shul, it has to look nice, people see it. On the other hand, if the point is not necessarily it has to be beautiful, point is that it has to be there because it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a law going back to Moshe Rabbeinu by our Sinai, and it's not there for beauty. It's just there because of kavod, honor of the Torah. The Torah, it's honorable that you should have lines. So in that case, tefillin and mezuzahs are both rolled up. One is inside the tefillin, one is inside the mezuzah on the wall. In the olden days, it was inside the wall. Now it's on the wall, but it's in a case. Right? You don't just have a piece of parchment laying around taped to your door. Nobody sees the ksav, the writing. So then there's no need to have Sirtut, to have the lines on a tefillin and mezuzah, because no one sees it. What about maybe mezuzah? You could be seen possibly, but tefillin definitely nobody sees. Is inside of a box. So is it because it should be beautiful and people shouldn't get mixed up when they read it? Or is it because halacha in writing? And if it's halacha in the writing of the Torah, because halacha Moshe Mei Sinai, then you have to do it also in tefillin and mezuzahs. So that now the Gemara will discuss that idea. Abaya Sharu was further related that tefillin and mezuzahs, which were allowed to be, which are kosher if they're written by heart from memory, shtaral devei bar chavu, the house, the family of Bar Chavu, they were sellers. He was a tefillin merchant. He was like he had a tefillin store. Abaya allowed them lemichtav tefillin umezuzas sheloi min eksav, to write tefillin and mezuzahs from memory, not copying from another tefillin or mezuzah. Kiman, according to which opinion did Abaya allow them to write tefillin and mezuzahs from memory? Kihai Tana, like this Tanya, like this specific Tana. The Tanya, Rabbi Yirmiyah Omer Mishum Rabbeinu, Rabbi Yirmiyah said, in the name of our master Yehuda Nasi, as we said earlier, Rabbi Yirmiyah is buried in Tiberia, right outside an apartment building. But Rabbi Yirmiyah said in the name of Rav, tefillin and mezuzahs nichtavos sheloi min haksav. Tefillin and mezuzahs are allowed to be written from memory. The ein tzrichas sirtut, and he says tefillin and mezuzahs do not need these lines, parallel, horizontal lines that are etched into the parchment and evenly spaced intervals, and the letters are written under these lines. Tefillin and mezuzahs do not need it. The hilchasa and halacha is, and Rashi says hilchasa is not a moira passing the halacha, but halacha is that we have a tradition going back to Moshe Rabbeinu is tefillin ein tzrichin sirtut. Tefillin do not require lines to be etched into the parchment. It's not necessary. The Erech and Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah ruled that you don't need lines in tefillin entirely, but you need from the top, the sides, and the bottom. So, for example, in this picture, this is not such a good picture. This is a zoom up of a column. But an entire sirtut, an entire page of a Torah, entire column, Sirtut, Sefer Torah. Maybe here you'll have a picture. No, you don't have one here. But a Sefer Torah, for example, over here, you have just the line on the bottom, line on the side, and line on top in a tefillin. That's what he says. So he says, tefillin, according to the Ramah, you need at least lines on the top, the bottom, and the sides. But you don't need lines by every single. You don't need sirtuts etched in lines by every single one. So tefillin do not need lines. Mezuzahs, tzrichin sirtut. Mezuzahs need lines. What's the difference between tefillin and mezuzahs? We'll see soon. Idi ve'idi nichtavos sheloi min haksav. And tefillin and mezuzahs can both be written by heart. The purpose of the sirtut of the lines is to make it beautiful, to make the writing look nice. So therefore, tefillin does not need the writing to look nice, because tefillin are always covered up. You don't have to see, you never really get to see the writing of your tefillin. Mezuzahs also technically, they weren't really checked that often. Nowadays, we take what the poskim say, we check it twice every 7 years, especially if it's outdoors and it's exposed to the elements. The Rishonim actually have a machlokas, a disagreement whether tefillin needs lines or not. Rabbeinu Tam says that they only need lines in the top and the bottom and the sides. But mezuzahs, like it says in our Gemara, need lines in every single one. There's a Masechta Gittin who brings a letter that was written between two Tanayim, two Amirayim, and it quoted a pasuk, and the other Amir wrote back to him, how could you write a pasuk in a letter, a verse in a letter, without making lines on top and on bottom? So he says the same thing should be when you're writing tefillin or writing mezuzahs, you should also make lines on top and the bottom. The Ran holds that you don't need lines at all in tefillin, even on top and on the bottom, because no one's ever going to read it. Halachically, today, tefillin only need lines on top and the bottom. Some opinions say that if you did not make the lines on top and bottom, it's possible. If you did not know how to make proper to write in a straight line, then you should definitely have the lines in the tefillin. But nowadays, the minhag brought down by the Chavetz by the Mishnah Brura, is that everybody makes lines in tefillin and everybody makes lines in mezuzahs, and everybody should have it written down. When you write tefillin mezuzahs, you write directly. You write it on the lines. If a sofer wrote down the letters of the Torah or tefillin, but he wrote it not connected to the line, he wrote it in between the two lines, so not touching actually any of the lines. So if it would happen just once or twice, it's still kosher. If a sofer does it consistently, it says they gave a knas, they gave him a penalty that everything he wrote, it becomes invalid. Rabbi Akiva Eger writes that he was one time asked the question. There's a city in his area called Markosh, and he showed him a whole bunch of, and the sofer of the city came and showed Rabbi Akiva Eger a whole bunch of mezuzahs, and he saw that some of the lines were not written, were not etched in straight, but everything was written in between the lines. And he says if it wasn't done properly, he made it possible, he made it invalid. So the lines have to be straight, and so therefore it's very important when you buy tefillin and mezuzahs to make sure you're buying it from a reliable sofer, not just that you're buying it from a reliable store, but from a reliable sofer as well. Because if even, let's say, the Sirtut, the etching was done, Shaloi Lishma was done by a machine, not having a mind, it will shame Kedushas tefillin, having a mind for the holiness of tefillin, then it could invalidate the entire tefillin or mezuzah. So when you're buying tefillin and mezuzahs, you should make sure to buy it from a sofer which you know reliably that they personally are a good sofer.
What percentage are true?
It's very hard to know what percentage is not good. Generally, if someone buys in the lowest range, like the very basic ones, is a much higher chance that they're not going to be. It could be problematic.
They're making them by machine, and can they stop it?
Could they stop it? It depends. You know what I'm saying?
It's not kosher.
Depends where it's coming from. I mean, I don't think it's so easy to regulate what happens across the entire world. You know, I'm saying it's what happens anywhere. I'm saying there's been stories of fake mezuzahs coming out of the Far East, right? Where they found they hired certain non-Jewish individuals to write mezuzahs, thought they could get a fair price. But Baruch Hashem, being that they never learned the halachas and made a lot of basic mistakes, and they're able to track it down and realize that what they were doing.
Yeah, I mean, I read about actually a Reform rabbi who was sincere. He thought, "Oh, I'm good with calligraphy. The only thing I have to do in order to issue a Torah is just like
To copy, to trace.
Approaching the calligraphy." But then he learned actually, as far as the Rambam, you know, he was sincere. But he's writing Sefer Torah actually were valid, and so but I mean, I guess in his case, like Like if you knew, oh, he's a reform rabbi, he probably doesn't know how to make a good Sefer Torah.
So the general consensus today is that older Sefer Torah,
Mhm.
probably over 75, over 80 years old, are generally accepted as kosher
Mhm.
without without undue research. You don't have to really look into it too much, because even let's say the Reform or the Conservative, they got a Sefer Torah from 75 years ago, they were buying from a kosher Sefer Torah.
Mhm.
But nowadays, if you buy a Sefer Torah, any newer Sefer Torah, anything newer, older than at least 50 years, maybe longer, you have to have a reliable source to find out where it came from and who the Sefer was, or who the rabbi of the shul which got the Sefer Torah, when they got it, where it was, because it's impossible from just looking at a Sefer Torah to really know if it's a kosher Torah or not. You can't really tell. If it could be so many things that you can never tell. And one example we gave is Sirtut, making the lines in the Torah. Was it done by a Jew who l'shem kedusha Sefer Torah, having in mind for the holiness of a Sefer Torah? If you wrote the words first,
Mhm.
and then afterwards you made the lines, it's also puzzle, it's also invalid, even if he's a God-fearing Sefer. Right? So you imagine it's missing one line, one etch, and then he only saw the Sefer, found it afterwards, and he puts hours of work into it. It's very tempting for him to just make one line and make it everything look good. And there's no way of ever telling that anything ever happened.
Mhm. And then actually what you can do is you can actually bring over a software, the software will probably be able to tell you what's cooking with it.
Right. So therefore, it's very important when buying tefillin, mezuzos, and Sefer Torah to have a reliable source that you could trace back to the actual Sefer who wrote the Sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos. Imagine you have a computer programmer, and he's running systems, and these systems run millions and billions of transactions. And if there's one mistake in one letter of code, in one line, it could cause the entire system to crash. And every minute, millions of dollars could be lost because of a malfunction in one line of code. This is just one line of computer code. Imagine what it is in the Sefer Torah, tefillin and mezuzos. Rabbi Kiva said to his student that you have to be so careful. He says, because if his student was a cipher, he says, if you make one crown extra or missing one crown on top of a letter, you could be machrev oilamus, you could destroy worlds, all the worlds, heavenly worlds, thousands of worlds, and you could be machrev abaynev, you could build worlds and destroy worlds just with your writing if you're writing it properly. So it's very important when you're getting tefillin and mezuzos to make sure that you have a proper cipher. Someone, preferably like Rameir or Rav Chananel, someone like that, preferably. Okay, let's continue. We have 10 more minutes. We'll continue with Kuntras Umayan. If you have a sefer in front of you, it's Maimer Maimer 25, chapter 3. Right now, in the Rebbe Rashab is discussing how the Yetzer Hara works. And he's describing a workday of the Yetzer Hara. And he applies it to many different people in many different statuses, many different states. You have those who daven with minyan every day, but it's a schlep for them, and to get them to sit and learn, go to a shir, forget about it. And they say, we're too busy working. And even if you got us to a shir, we wouldn't be able to pay attention and to concentrate. My mind is somewhere else. Some people, he goes on a level down, and they come to shul just on Monday and Thursday because I need to hear Torah reading. But even when they're davening, their thoughts are somewhere else. The famous story, I forgot who it was, Magen Mizrich, when somebody finished davening, went over to him and he said, Shalom Aleichem, welcome.
What do you think with the
Berditchever? And he says, welcome. And he says, why are you telling me welcome? I was just here. He says, well, when you were davening, you were thinking about you're going to travel to the business sphere in Leipzig. So your thoughts were in Leipzig. So I'm telling you, welcome back. But at least you're davening with a minyan. You're davening in shul. You're davening with a tzibur. Now, the entire week, it could be they're literally not davening properly. And in many aspects, it's even worse than a behemoth, than an animal. Because an animal at least does what it's supposed to do, but the Jewish people know better, and they're not doing what they're supposed to do. What this causes is that when one is not busy working, what do they use? What do they do their free time with? Using their free time, probably sit on the couch and watch a video or something else, because that's what they became habituated to. They work so hard, they feel we're so tired, we deserve a little relaxation. Let me see what the Steelers, how they're doing this week, or other news is going on. And it comes out that on Shabbos, we're too occupied to actually appreciate Shabbos, to make Shabbos, to elevate Shabbos. Asher be'emes, kol yisoid binyanai. The truth is, the foundation of this whole entire structure, he's busy with his occupation. And now I am unable to daven properly, and I can't concentrate, and I can't learn Torah. I might lose a customer, I might lose a deal, I might lose something. Take someone like the Rebbe Rashab to tell this and to take the achrayus to say that all of this is a grave error, and it's foolish, and it's a mistake. The manashach. Look at it from either way you look at it. If God forbid, on Rosh Hashanah was not decided, he should receive the chesed, the kindness from Hashem, the effulgence coming from Hashem. What's it going to help him to work so hard? He's not going to earn a penny more than what's decided in Rosh Hashanah. Vim yesh kitzvas v'amshachas hachesed l'mayla, and if it was allotted to him that he should have a great amount of goodness coming to him, ma ein tzrichim riba yesek. He does not need to work so much. Doesn't need to work a lot. V'dai gam b'ma'at esek, and even a little bit of work is enough to make the receptacle to receive Hashem's bracha. Me'yachashu lavish levad, since the work that he's doing is only a garment for Hashem. V'riboy tirdosav, and this that he has so many preoccupations, endless preoccupations. And the fact that Torah study and davening is now a hindrance to his making a living, making money, or being successful, is rak mishtusei hayesers, comes from the nonsense of the Yetzer Hara. But he says very strong words here. And he demonstrates that he, God forbid, gives credence the garment, which is the business, the ikr, is now the main primary factor, and that this is a source of his livelihood. And that's why he's so intensely preoccupied in his work. And he's also constantly scheming how to get ahead and how to make more money and how to undercut everyone else. He considers it a primary factor. And not just as comes from the Yetzer Hara, but if one acts in such a way, it's this is literally idol worship. Every Jew would give up their life not to serve idols. This is the same thing. In Maimer 23, chapter 1, we explain that one who bows to the suns and to the moon, to Mother Nature, he thinks that they are the benefactors. They're the main ones giving, the sun and the moon and nature. They are only merely agents of Hashem. U'levushin levad, k'moshe nisbar l'el. And they're merely garments to give Hashem's goodness. K'moikein heina in k'moshe mechashe v'sa'esek le'ikr. Applies the same thing. If one emphasizes the business as the important thing, and therefore he's intensely involved in scheming and working. This is similar to the idea of bowing down to them, thinking that they have a power, thinking that there's some end in itself to the work. If he devotes his head, his mind, and his talents and his faculties to business to the extent that he has no time for Torah, it is a gamken inyan ishtachava beruchnis. This is also the idea of spiritually bowing down to idols. This is, God forbid, same as one who identical to idol worship. So
money and stuff.
Worship of money. If it's coming at the expense of learning Torah and davening with a minyan, davening with kavanah, then it is, God forbid, identical to idol worship. Kitzur summary. Balei asakim, Balei avoda ein mispalim tefillah b'tzir b'kfiyas u'tfilasam chetufam le'em machshav zaros. If you are businessmen and working men who don't daven often with a minyan, and when they daven chaplap, very hurried, and when they daven le'em machshav zaros, full of irrelevant thoughts. Even worse, they are not participating in public Torah study. Baruch Hashem, everyone here participates in public Torah study more than very often. And they say, I'm too busy to earn because I'm earning a living. And this causes becoming very coarse. And even in Shabbos, where there's no work, they profane it, and profane the rest and the holiness of Shabbos with trivial pursuits. And in the final thing, the Rebbe Rashab showed how everything here is all these excuses are from just imagination, and he says it's completely false. So this is sort of bringing together all the things that we learned for the last many mamarim, how it all comes together. It shows how a Baal Esek, someone who is a businessman, a working man, how they too should devote their main effort to learning Torah, public, making davening with kavanah, davening with a tzibur, with a minyan, and everything else, thinking they'll be more successful. Taking away, they're not going to add any more from what was expected, from what was allotted in Rosh Hashanah. And they're not going to lose as long as they make a keli, they make some effort for parnasa, but it doesn't have to be